Hi, welcome to the Unicorn Network. And today we're talking to an investor at Lightspeed Partners. So thank you for coming with us.
Oh, thanks
on the show.
Good to be here.
So before we get into any of the more detailed stuff about
Yeah.
your career and all that, I just want to talk to you about a problem that we've seen in the investor community and the founder community in India. Is that a lot of founders walk into an investor meeting and they've just prepared the wrong data. They have the wrong information and they walk in and they go, I've got a great idea. And maybe they have a great idea, but they have no way of proving it. Because they're surrounded by people who always go, friends and family who go, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
So when they walk in and they're completely bamboozled by investors who go, how do I make money off this?
Yeah.
So are there any instances of like a founder coming in and doing something really bad or something really great that you could share with us and talk about how this, this relationship works?
I mean, let's maybe start with the really bad. I mean, I think, and that probably is, that's probably where you can learn from the most, right?
Yeah.
I think the biggest, so the biggest issue I typically come across when, founder comes, pitches us, great product and so on, but sort of just dives in straight into the product without actually, kind of explaining anything about the market or their knowledge about the market, any unique insights, and what is sort of the core problem which they're solving, right? It's actually very interesting. Like often that's, we ask that as a question and then, we get, in some cases, if founders like really well prepared, we get a very crisp answer. And I think that's something which is, signal for us, right?
So the idea of you can summarize your idea in one sentence.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally that, because that also shows like clarity of thought, right? In terms of, and it sort of shows up then in the, in the company itself. Versus, if the founder talks about 5 different problems, I'm like,
just avoiding
it's early for us right now. That you still need to figure out what you're exactly trying to tackle.
So these guys, are you saying, just to be clear, is this a problem with founders having bad products or just not doing the research for the meeting?
So I find a mix of both. Typically, sometimes founders are just unprepared. I think often like the answer is also reflective of sort of the stage at which their product is. So it might be a product which is still searching for a problem. In some sense, that's actually another issue I often come across.
Like the product's too early for its time.
So I actually feel the best time to approach any investor is, your product actually may not be complete yet, right? That's actually okay. But if you have if you have clarity on what's the problem you're solving and what is your solution or intended solution, I think that's a great place to at least start engaging, depending on the investor, like either angels if you're pre-product, or seed investors if you're pre-product, or if you have a product then larger investors. But I think that clarity has to be there.
Right. So I want to switch a little bit to one of your success stories. So a company called ShareChat, if I'm not mistaken, and ShareChat, a lot of you might not have heard of it because we're speaking English and it's not an English-based app. But it is the largest social media company from India. And it's got a lot of people, in the millions of subscribers already. And it's something that I find very interesting where in India at least, or maybe all over the world, I'm not sure, people tend to build startups focused at metros. And in India, metros generally mean English-speaking people, upper middle class, people who've gone and lived abroad or want to live abroad. So these guys came in and they've built a social media app and they've deliberately not put English in it. So I just want to know, do you see that as a one-off, or is that where the future of startups in India are going to be?
No, I actually think, as an investment community, we need to be spending more time on sort of the audience which a startup like ShareChat is going after, right? If you think about, take this sort of geo explosion which has happened, right? Geo adoption. Most of that user is this, as I like to call the next billion user, which ShareChat is going after.
Google name,
this is basically, the user whose first language is not English, but one of whatever 26, 30.
Maybe not even regional second language.
Probably may not even be second language. And this is a user who's actually, experiencing the internet for the first time, mobile first, right? Literally on first time smartphone user. And in fact, that's I think the future of the Indian internet.
That's interesting. So do you think services for people outside urban areas, people who don't have access to services we take for granted in a metropolitan city? Do you think those kind of startups and apps that cater to those people are the future?
No, absolutely. That's where I think this. If you look at sort of the first wave of consumer internet companies which came out in India were sort of, including sort of the e-commerce companies like a Flipkart or Amazon, are really focused around the first 30 to 50 million consumers, I'd say at max, right?
Okay.
I'd say the sort of the next segment is really where I think the next set of companies are going to come out. So for example, whether it's in in jobs, for example, I'd say the first equivalent is like a Naukri.com, which is more white collar.
Yeah.
But if you look at this segment, it's more about blue collar,
Right.
There are very few companies actually focusing on that segment.
Okay, so an app that gives jobs to migrants or
Yeah,
internal migrants.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's one example.
Yeah.
On the edtech side, right? First wave has been more around IIT education and sort of K through 12 companies like Byju's, who we are also investors in. I think the next set is going to be around stuff like government jobs, right? Which is a rage if you go out of tier 2, tier 3 in smaller towns.
Yeah, that's what tier 2, tier 3 cities. A lot of parents, even the upper middle class ones, want their kids to get a government job.
Yeah.
So like a civil service job.
Exactly, because that's sort of this prestige, there's security,
there's power.
There's power. Yeah. I mean, so very different. Just the mindset's a little bit different from urban areas.
Okay. And have you seen, like the government's talked a lot about investing in startups and this and that.
Yeah.
Have you seen a lot of support from the government?
Yeah, I've noticed in the last year or so, at least there've been more. So the government has been, essentially organizing more and more sort of meetups. Like Startup India was actually a very good initiative where some of our portfolio companies also went and sort of met with sort of senior bureaucrats and even politicians. Right. So I think it's still early. I mean, it's at the start. The government started reaching out, but actually the biggest contribution I actually feel which the government has been doing is creating sort of these open platforms, right? So take something in payments like UPI.
Right.
India is actually probably one of the few countries which actually has an open payments platform.
Right.
Right. And initiatives like that, I'd say, are even more helpful for the startup community.
Something to build off of.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So.
Yeah. So now I'd like to take it back a little bit, take it back to investors, and let's break it down a bit.
Sure.
So, what do you see as the more interesting industries for the next year? Where do you see startups coming from? I mean, a couple of years ago it was food startups. So, what do you see as the interesting industry?
So, if I think about more near term, one change I've noticed is increasing willingness for domestic enterprises to essentially adopt technology in their operations.
Okay.
So, for example, basically SaaS. Or
so a lot
software
of
products.
guys.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically, for example, we've done a bunch of investments, companies which are doing software for logistics, right?
Okay.
Or software for, vendor financing, right?
Okay. Companies that aren't glamorous but that make a lot of money.
Yeah, more on the B2B side, right? We're investors in a company called Udaan, which helps small retailers procure their goods, right? Through an open marketplace. Right, so I think these have been more like enterprise focused. I think the change has been spurred because push of government on GST and I think the fact that everybody has a smartphone in their hand now, including the end enterprise user. Yeah. I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, you get small cigarette wallas who have Paytm.
I mean it's very very universal now.
Yeah.
And then I think outside of that, I think interesting areas. I haven't seen much in vernacular so far, but just given our previous point around how the next, this next set of internet users, English is not their first language, I expect to see a lot of stuff around, sort of vernacular experiences, right?
So that's an interesting, that's two tracks you've defined pretty clearly in the last few minutes is, if you're going to do user-facing, startups, apps, whatever, you focus at people, in regional languages.
Yeah.
But if you're doing, backend, then it makes more sense to focus on urban companies? Yeah.
I think most of the enterprise, at least who are early adopters of technology, would be still, at least that user would be more white collarish, more English first, right? So, it's not necessarily about urban or not urban, but more in terms of the type of user.
Right. So then let's final couple of questions I'll ask you is about literally investors, right? So founders. Okay. So these founders, you start a company, you've got a product, you think it's good, you've done your market research. How important is getting a steady stream of revenue before walking into an investor meeting? Should you be saying, look, I've already got this money, or can you just walk and say, if you give me some money, I can make some money?
I mean, if the business model, if there is let me put it this way, like if you're a content startup, right? I think typically at the stage you'd come to us, a revenue model would not necessarily be as important at that point. But for example, if the core value of your business is around maybe building transactions, right? I'd want to see some validation, but the scale of revenue typically matters less to me.
Okay, so it depends on what kind of startup it is.
Yeah, it depends on the type of startup. If there's no, so let me put it this way, right? Typically, so early metrics for early stage investors like us, early metrics or early traction is not necessarily the best indication of a potential of a business. And I'm saying maybe it might sound a bit controversial, but what it is indicative of is that the entrepreneurs tried a bunch of different things and there are insights which have come out of that. Because typically what happens is that at the stages we invest, which is seed, Series A, right, predominantly, business models will likely change, right? The business itself could change. Right. So that's why I don't put too much emphasis on the exact, what the exact metrics are, but more in terms of what are the interpretation of the entrepreneurs, like what are the insights on those metrics, right? So I'd view it more from that perspective.
Okay, so now pretend I'm a startup guy. I'm walking into your office.
Yeah.
What are the things I should nail in my my presentation? What am I supposed to nail?
I think one is just what we touched upon earlier. But what is the problem you're solving, and just very, very crisp articulation of that.
Okay.
I think second is ideally, depending on the stage, another signal I look for is just the quality of folks which that person has been able to garner around him, right? So in terms of the early team.
Also quality of the team. Okay.
Quality of the team. I think that's very important because I think that's also reflective of has this entrepreneur been able to inspire a group of smart people to join him, right?
Right.
I think that's very, very indicative of success.
Right.
And I think third, I'll put it this way: when I walk out of a meeting where I've learned something, right, or with some unique insight which the entrepreneurs shared about their market, that is signal for me, right? That typically after a first meeting, I'll be like, yeah, I want to spend more time.
That makes you think. Okay.
That makes me think.
So if you walk in there with the fact that no one knows, then that's really going to help you.
I mean, that's what will make you successful if you have a proprietary insight into the market you're working on. I mean, if you don't have that, if I know more than you on that market, there's something wrong. So
I'll start the company myself.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks.
This has been a great episode of the Unicorn Network because we've got everything from regional startups to backend startups to how exactly to impress an investor. So this has been the Unicorn Network and the Big Scoop.